In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
I tried and I failed to get bin Laden, and I did everything I could for President Bill Clinton. No, sir, I don't think so. The former president, seems to be able to deny facts with impunity. Bin Laden is alive today because of Mr. Clinton, Mr. Sandy Berger, and Mr. Richard Clarke refused to kill him, and that is the bottom line. This is a quote from Dr. Michael Scheuer.
The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey, welcome to the Abracast. Who am I? I'm John Towers. This is the Abracast. This is the third 9/11 in context episodes. So the last two episodes, we kind of went from the beginning of the ending of the Islamic Caliphate about 334 years ago at the gates of Vienna in 1683, all the way up to September 2001. I kind of decided to annex this episode a little bit because even though I wanted you guys to have an out, like if you didn't want to listen to all, all the blame Clinton stuff or whatever, then you just don't have to listen to this episode. You can still get tons of great information from the last two episodes, and you don't really have to get into this with me tonight. But this is, that is what this episode is going to be about. It's going to detail the huge amount of liability that Bill Clinton, Sandy Berger, Richard Clarke, and Jamie Gorelick all have on for 9/11. So there you go. There's your fucking trigger warning. This is the featured books for this series have been Michael Scheuer's book Bin Laden. It's also one of the featured books also include Losing Bin Laden, How Bill Clinton's Failure Unleashed Global Terror, and the straight up 9/11 Commission report. And also there was this like super huge documentary called The Road to 9/11, which I also watched. So we're attempting to show that 9/11 wasn't just a few guys rolling out of bed, grabbing box cutters, and changing the world. Like I said, this is my pet peeve with these 9/11 truther dudes, these conspiracy theorists, when they're like, wizards knocked the building down as part of a ritual to bring forth transgenderism. Right? Those buildings represented Boaz and Yakin, and like the Masons had something to do with it. Those buildings were wired to explode, bro. Or it was a fucking invisible laser shot those buildings. Actually, I just believe that some crazy Muslims did this. And the conspiracy dudes, they're like, oh, you really believe this story? Where they're just, these 19 guys can just do this with box cutters. So I've extensively said in these 3 episodes that we've been talking about this massively big combinations of the right people, the combinations of the right places, and the combinations of the right frames of mind and circumstances. We're kind of shedding some light on this wild rash of, quote, bureaucratic incompetence, unquote. This sort of phenomenon that allows people like the blind sheikh a visa and lets them somehow insanely into the country once he gets out of an Egyptian prison for murdering an Egyptian prime minister. Or stuff like the CIA knowing that Al-Qaeda members connected to a Brooklyn terror cell are enrolled in flying lessons in Florida and not being allowed to tell the FBI about it. Things like knowing where Osama bin Laden is and having snipers on him in their scopes and not green lighting or assassinating him before all this stuff started. Or knowing where bin Laden is hiding and then notifying other Muslim countries. So instead of picking them up, they could go ahead and get him out of harm's way. So that's pretty much a recap of what we've talked about. Now we're going to kind of back up, rewind, and talk about and examine more in the late 90s. This is the Clinton era. And we're going to pull apart or look at why 9/11 was actually allowed to happen. So I guess at the beginning of this whole thing, I was like, it was not an inside job, but we're going to see that insiders had a lot to do with it. Not in a false flag sense of a way, just in a not understanding the enemy sense of a way. Having one of these rainbows and unicorns sort of sense of it, not understanding is what I'm saying. So I have a couple things also that I need to talk about. I mentioned in the last episode that the steel, this stuff about steel melting, and I never really circled back on it. So what you're talking about is a massive structure. The tallest structure is, I don't know, maybe the Empire State Building by a couple of feet, or the World Trade Center was taller than the Empire State Building by a couple of feet. Anyhow, this thing is enormous. What happens, you can just do this physics experiment in your brain. It's like this mental experiment. I wasn't great at science in school, but I'm sure I'm going to be wrong, or at least wrong about some of this stuff. So please feel free to reach out and tell me how big of a dipshit I am. Or how wrong I am, but we all know that energy is not destroyed, it's only transferred. So if you have this vat of acid, and say you have this big spring, and you condense the spring down, so all the potential energy is in the spring. The spring has all this energy. We know that if you're holding it and you dip the spring into this vat of acid, as it dissolves, the acid melts. It melts the spring. Where does that potential energy go? It's not being destroyed, so where does it go? So, think about it for a second. Well, you want me to do another one? All right. Before we get I'll do one more. Everyone knows that there was no plane crash in Shanksville, right? It's just like a hole. There are no parts of a plane. It's an inside job, right? It was a missile. Well, I don't know. I think the guys that investigate airplane crashes say this sort of thing because every crash they've ever investigated, people who were in control of the plane were trying to stop the plane from crashing into the planet. At Mach, whatever these fucking planes fly at. So slow the plane down as much as possible to do an emergency or a crash landing. So zooming into the ground as fast as it was flying disintegrated a large portion of the plane. This is the same reason we don't see wing impressions at the Pentagon. You have the same fucking problem. Everyone's used to looking at airplane crashes that people are trying to stop from crashing. Not ones that people have the pedal to the fucking metal. Oh, okay. So if you're wondering what happens to the spring and the acid, this is what happens. The temperature of the acid rises proportionately. Now, there is a lot of, or it's significantly, I don't know, it depends on like the vat of acid, I guess, or whatever, but it's kind of how big the spring is, I guess. The point of the matter is that we're dealing with these giant structures that the weight sitting there has got a lot of potential energy in it with gravity and just how fucking heavy the building is. And when you start knocking floors down or running fucking airplanes into them, you know, who knows what's going on with that, you know? Do I think that running an airplane full of jet fuel into a building is enough to knock it down? Yes. Yes, I do. So there you go. All of you space guys and your satellites with invisible fucking laser beams and all this, you might be listening to the wrong fucking podcast right now, but come back, you know, when we talk about wizards and stuff. We love to have you back. This just might not be the podcast for you. So, okay. So if you guys are playing at home, now is the time I would like you to summon your vessel of the art and mix up your favorite weapon of mass distraction. Mine, rightfully so, happens to be a Jinn Jihad this evening. And, and join me with toasting to the supporters of the show, the fellow craft and above supporters, the members of the degree of Fulgar Correspondentia, in Patreon or Subscribestar. Here is to you. Thank you, fine people. All right, let's go. A lot of this stuff comes from Richard Minter's book called Losing Bin Laden, How Bill Clinton's Failure Unleashed Global Terror. It also comes from this guy, Dr. Michael Scheuer, in his book. We're going to talk about him later. He was the head motherfucker in charge of the CIA unit to find bin Laden. I think he ran it from 96 to, I don't know, whenever. So he's actually like a real outspoken dude, and he's kind of like this firebrand. Not a whole lot of people like him, especially Richard Clarke. And my thing is, if Richard Clarke doesn't like you, then I'll probably like you, because I do not like Richard Clarke at all. It's important to note that before Bill Clinton's inauguration, the CIA started collecting a ton of data on Al-Qaeda. So let's get some context here, shall we? President Clinton gets sworn into office January of 1993. The World Trade Center gets bombed in 1993. The CIA was collecting all this information, so the Clinton people said, okay, well, you got to give all this stuff over to the FBI. And this is what I think is a huge problem, as I mentioned in the last episode, is that Bill Clinton had this point of view that this was a legal issue or a law enforcement problem. This was not an act of war. Even though bin Laden had stood up, he's holding press conferences and he's sending communiques saying that this is this Muslim tradition, like you have to declare war, you have to give your enemy time to convert to Islam or whatever. And the decision was made to arrest bin Laden, fly him here, and put him on trial. I mean, imagine putting bin Laden on trial. Imagine the propaganda that would be churned out from a situation like that. In the running up to 2000, they were targeting vessels of war like the USS Cole. The Cole got blasted, 18 fucking Marines died, dozens of people injured, and there are these national security advisors in the left ear of the president going, yeah, I don't think an attack on a destroyer, is enough for us to retaliate. Are you fucking kidding me? I know everyone's like, hindsight is 2020, bro. But when this shit was popping off in the 90s, like the Khobar Towers and the USS Cole, the one thing that Bill Clinton did do is he established this bin Laden unit. He put this guy, Michael Scheuer, in charge. I'm actually just going to go ahead and get into some of this actual 9/11 Commission report. Remember, he had this thing packed. He had it stacked up. It had people like Jamie Gorelick. He had all these acolytes and stuff on the commission. They're there protecting him. And we're going to talk about that when we get done with all this 9/11 Commission report stuff. We're going to go through a few of these when people are being nice and they're saying, quote, missed opportunities, unquote. I like to call the quote, failed opportunities, unquote. I just want to do one quick note. The responsibility of 9/11 falls on the fact that Al-Qaeda was allowed to grow and prosper, and the decision was made not to take out their leader when the chances existed to do so. Not once, but 4 times, according to the 9/11 report. President Clinton has acknowledged that as a regret. This was Marco Rubio on his remarks on NBC's Meet the Press, February 14th of 2018. So Rubio calls out 4 times, according to the 9/11 report. I picked through the 9/11 report and I found way more than 4 times. So I don't know what report Rubio was looking at. I presume. So we're going to talk a little bit more than 4 of them. We'll talk about the ones that I found. Some data on quite a few. Many of them, May 1989, Tarnack Farms. There was this plan to raid the Tarnack Farms. It got rejected. A compound of about 80 concrete. I'm just going to read it. I'm not going to summarize it. I'm just going to read this thing. Hold on. These are from the 9/11 Commission report. Bill Clinton and the missed opportunities to kill Osama bin Laden, 2016. A compound of about 80 concrete or mud brick buildings surrounded by a 10-foot wall. Tarnack Farms was located in an isolated desert area on the outskirts of Kandahar. CIA officers were able to map the entire site, identifying the houses that belonged to bin Laden's wives and the one where bin Laden himself was most likely to sleep. Working with the tribals, they drew up plans for this raid, and they ran 2 complete rehearsals in the United States during the fall of 1997. Early 98, planners at the Counter-Terrorist Center were ready to come back to the White House to seek formal approval. One group of tribals would subdue the guards, enter Tarnack Farms, stealthily grab bin Laden and take him to a desert site outside Kandahar and turn him over to a second group. The second group of tribals would take him to a desert landing zone. From there, a CIA plane would take him to New York, an Arab capital, or wherever he was to be arraigned. Briefing papers prepared by the Counter-Terrorist Center acknowledged that hitches might develop. People might be killed, and bin Laden supporters might retaliate, perhaps taking U.S. citizens in Kandahar hostage. I mean, I don't even know why this is part of the report. That this is the name of the game when you're talking about special forces operations. But the briefing papers also noted there was a risk in not acting. Sooner or later, they said, bin Laden will attack U.S. interests, perhaps using weapons of mass destruction. The CIA planners conducted their 3rd complete rehearsal in March. The plan had now been modified so that the tribals would keep bin Laden in hiding for up to a month before turning him over to the United States, thereby increasing the chances of keeping the U.S. hand out of sight. On May 18, CIA managers reviewed a draft memorandum of notification, which is a legal document authorizing the capture operation. In 1986, presidential finding had authorized worldwide covert action against terrorism and probably provided adequate authority, but mindful of the old rogue elephant charge, senior CIA managers may have wanted something on paper to show that they were not acting on their own. Discussion of this memorandum brought to the surface an unease about paramilitary covert action that had become ingrained, at least among some CIA senior managers. Despite misgivings, the CIA leadership cleared the draft memorandum that sent it on to the National Security Council. May 20th to 24, the CIA ran final graded rehearsals of the operation spread over 3 time zones, even bringing the personnel from the region. The FBI also participated. The rehearsal went well. The Counterterrorist Center planned to brief cabinet-level principals and their deputies the following week, giving June 23rd as the date of the raid, with bin Laden to be brought out of Afghanistan no later than July 23rd. On May 20th, Director Tennant discussed the high-risk operation with Berger. This is Sandy Berger, one of the bad actors in this story, and his deputies, warning that people might be killed. Well, you got dudes running around in guns kidnapping people. Yes, someone might be fucking killed, including bin Laden. Success was to be defined as an exfiltration of bin Laden out of Afghanistan. A meeting of principals was scheduled for May 29 to decide whether the operation should go ahead, but the principals did not meet. The plan was never presented to the White House for a decision. Working level CIA officers were disappointed to capture no capture plan before 9/11 ever again attained the same level of detail and preparation. The tribals reported readiness to act diminished, and bin Laden's security precautions and defense became more elaborate and more formidable. So if you're like, hey, I thought this was all about Clinton not saying it, and you just read that this plan was never even put up to the White House, it was put up to the White House. It was put up to Richard Clarke, who called it off. The thing is about the administration. It's about the mindset of the people in charge. That's why I said Richard Clarke was the guy who pulled the plug on this. And he stated these reasons. He was like, no, I mean, people could have gotten hurt. Yeah, people could have gotten hurt. So before we get into the next one, I just want to say something that you might have picked up listening between the lines here. So Richard Clarke has a track record for calling and notifying these foreign countries that we know that bin Laden is in their country. We're going to hear it over and over again in tonight's episode. So what we just heard was that Richard Clarke pulled the plug on this operation, and then towards the end we found out that Osama bin Laden started upping his security and making it more elaborate and more formal. I would like to venture a theory on how Osama bin Laden knew to up his security and make it more formal, since Richard Clarke is the one that pulled the plug on the operation. That's not in the report. It's details like this that makes me wonder why Jamie Gorelick was on the 9/11 Commission, though. So August 1998, a campaign-continued airstrike is shelved after Al-Qaeda attacks 2 embassies in Africa. The day after the embassy bombings, Tennant brought to a principals meeting intelligence that terrorist leaders were expected to gather in a camp near Kawawast, Afghanistan, to plan future attacks. According to Berger, Tennant said that several hundred would attend, including bin Laden. The CIA described the area as effectively military cantonment away from civilian population centers and overwhelmingly populated by jihadists. Well, we might pull the plug on this. We don't want to hurt anybody. The principals quickly reached a consensus on attacking the gathering. The strike's purpose was to kill bin Laden and his chief lieutenants. Berger put in place a tightly compartmented process designed to keep all planning a secret. On August 11th, General Zinni received orders to prepare detailed plans for a strike against the sites in Afghanistan. The Pentagon briefed President Clinton about these plans on August 12th and August 14th. Though the principals hoped that the missiles would hit bin Laden, the NSC staff recommended the strike whether or not there was firm evidence that the commanders were at the facilities. Later on August 20th, Navy vessels in the Arabian Sea fired their cruise missiles. Although most of them hit their intended targets, neither bin Laden nor other terrorist leaders were killed. Berger told us that after-action review by Director Tennant concluded that the strikes had killed 20 to 30 people in the camps, but probably missed bin Laden by a few hours. Where was Richard Clarke? During the last week of August 1998, officials began considering possible follow-on strikes. Bill Clinton was inclined to launch further strikes sooner rather than later. August 27, under the Secretary of Defense for Policy, Walter Slocum, was advised Secretary Cohen that the available targets were not promising. The experience of the previous week, he wrote, has only confirmed the importance of defining a clear, articulated rationale for military action that was effective as well as justified. But Slocum worried that simply striking some of these available targets did not add up to an effective strategy. Eventually, the discussion became mired in the bureaucracy and went nowhere. There's our old friend, bureaucratic incompetence, again raising its ugly head. All right, the next one. August 1998. Covert operations limited to capture operations, not kill. President Clinton signed a memorandum of notification authorizing CIA to let its tribal assets use force to capture bin Laden and his associates. CIA officers told the tribals that the plan to capture bin Laden, which had been turned off 3 months earlier, was back on. The memorandum also authorized the CIA to attack bin Laden in other ways. Also, an executive order froze the financial holdings that could be linked to bin Laden. The next one, December 1998. Missile strike against Kandahar rejected. Memo to kill bin Laden misunderstood. On December 20th, intelligence indicated that bin Laden would be spending the night at the Hajj Habash house, part of the governor's residence in Kandahar. He's sleeping in the governor's house in Kandahar. An urgent teleconference of the principals was arranged. Principals considered a cruise missile strike to kill bin Laden. One issue they discussed was the potential collateral damage, the number of innocent bystanders who would be killed or wounded. General Anthony Zinni predicted the number of well over 200, and he was concerned about the damage to a nearby mosque. The senior intelligence officer on the joint staff apparently made a different calculation, estimating half as much collateral damage and not predicting damage to the mosque. By the end of the meeting, the principals decided against recommending to the president that he order a strike. Later intelligence appeared to show that bin Laden had left his quarters before the strike would have occurred. Where was Richard Clarke? On December 21st, the day after principals decided not to launch the cruise missile strike against Kandahar, the CIA leaders urged strengthening the language to allow the tribals to be paid whether bin Laden was captured or killed. The new memorandum would allow the killing of bin Laden if the CIA had the tribals judged that capture was not feasible, a judgment it already seemed clear they had reached. The Justice Department lawyer who worked on the draft told us that what he envisioned was a group of tribals assaulting a location, leading to a shootout. Bin Laden and others would be captured if possible, but possibly would be killed. The administration's position was that under the law of armed conflict, killing a person who posed an imminent threat to the United States would be an act of self-defense, not an assassination. On Christmas Eve 1998, Sandy Berger sent a final draft to President Clinton with an explanatory memo. The president approved the document. Because the White House considered this operation highly sensitive, only a tiny number of people knew about the memorandum of notification. A message from Tenet to CIA field agent directed them to communicate to the tribals the instructions authorized by the president. The United States preferred that bin Laden and his lieutenants to be captured. Why? What? But if, I'm sorry, I'm getting exasperated. But if a successful capture operation was not feasible, the tribals were permitted to kill them. The instructions added that the tribals must avoid killing others unnecessarily and must not kill or abuse bin Laden or his lieutenants if they surrendered. Finally, the tribals would not be paid if this set of requirements was not met. Policymakers in the Clinton administration, including the president and his national security advisor, told us the president's intent regarding covert action against bin Laden was clear. He wanted him dead. That's not clear to me. This intent was never well communicated, not after reading the whole rest of the thing. That doesn't make any sense. Someone is lying. Tenet told the commission that except in one specific case, the CIA was authorized to kill bin Laden only in the context of a capture operation. CIA senior managers, operators, and lawyers confirmed this understanding. We always talked about how much easier it would have been to kill him, a former chief of the bin Laden unit said. Well, we're going to see. They had their chance. I'm going to do this. Hey, stick around. I'll be right back.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content and access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that, plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com. On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode.
Towards Mount Rainier, he saw 9 gleaming discs outlined against the snow, each one about the size of a C-54. Is it a function of false reporting? Is it a function of media incompetence or straight up misinformation? From my point of view, every, quote, flying saucer, unquote, story from this point on is at least a suspect for some sort of corruption. It has been over 2 years since the puzzling death of Captain Mantell. Mantell died mysteriously in the skies south of Fort Knox, but before his radio went silent, he sent a strange message to Goodman Air Force Base.
Support the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
Early 1999, decision not to deploy the AC-130 gunship option. After the decision, in which fear of collateral damage was an important factor, not to use a cruise missile against Kandahar in December 1998, Shelton and officers in the Pentagon developed plans for using an AC-130 gunship instead of cruise missile strikes. Designed specifically for the Special Forces, this version of the AC-130, known as Spooky, can fly in fast or from high altitudes undetected by radar, guided to its zone by an extraordinary complex electronics. It is capable of rapidly firing precision-guided 25, 40, and 150 millimeter projectiles. Because the system could target more precisely than a salvo of cruise missiles, it had a much lower risk of causing collateral damage. Here we go. After giving White House official Richard Clarke a briefing and being encouraged to proceed, Shelton formally directed Zinni and General Peter Scheuer, who headed the Special Operations Command, to develop plans for an AC-130 mission against bin Laden's headquarters and infrastructure in Afghanistan. The Joint Chiefs prepared a decision paper for deployment of the Special Operations aircraft. Though Berger and Clarke continued to indicate interest in this option, the AC-130s were never deployed. Clarke wrote at the time that Zinni opposed their use, and John Mayer, the Joint Staff Deputy Director of Operations, agreed this was Zinni's position. Zinni himself does not recall blocking the option because someone is lying. Where is Richard Clarke? He told us that he understood the Special Operations Command had never thought the intelligence good enough to justify actually moving AC-130s into position. Shoemaker says, on the contrary, he thought the AC-130 operation was feasible. So we can mark this one up to what? I don't know, bureaucratic incompetence? What a phenomenon. February, March 1999, a decision not to strike bin Laden's desert camp. What is this? Number 4, number 5? I lost count. Early in 99, the CIA received reporting that bin Laden was spending much of his time at one of several camps in the Afghanistan desert south of Kandahar. At the beginning of February, bin Laden was reportedly located in the vicinity of Sheikh Ali Camp, a desert hunting camp being used by visitors from a Gulf state. Public sources have stated that these visitors were from the United Arab Emirates. That's red flag number 1 of why this didn't happen. Reporting from CIA's assets provided a detailed description of the hunting camp, including its size, location, resources, and security, as well as of bin Laden's smaller adjacent camp. Because this was not in an urban area, missiles launched against it would have less of a risk of causing collateral damage to mosques. On February 8th, the military began to ready itself for a possible strike. The next day, National Technical Intelligence confirmed the location of the description of the larger camp and shown the nearby presence of official aircraft of the United Arab Emirates. Red flag. But the location of bin Laden's quarters could not be pinned down so precisely. The CIA did its best to answer a host of questions about the larger camp, the residents, and about bin Laden's daily schedule and routine to support military contingency planning. According to reporting from the tribals, bin Laden regularly went from his adjacent camp to the larger camp, where he visited the Emirates. The tribals were expected him to be at the hunting camp for such a visit at least until mid-morning of February 11th. No strike was launched by February 12th. Bin Laden had apparently moved on, and the immediate strike plans became moot. Where was Richard Clarke? According to CIA defense officials, policymakers were concerned about the danger that a strike would kill an Emirati prince, or that senior officials who might be with bin Laden or close by. The lead CIA official in the field, Gary Schroen, felt the intelligence reporting in the case was very reliable. The bin Laden unit chief, Mike, agreed, that's Mike Scheuer that we talked about, believed today that this was a lost opportunity to kill bin Laden before 9/11. This is the one that Richard Clarke in the documentary Road to 9/11, it's like this, I don't know, like 5-hour fucking thing. He actually admits to calling this country and being like, why is bin Laden there? And then he ghosts. He actually admits to this on fucking camera. He admits to it. Why isn't that in the 9/11 report? Well, because Jamie Gorelick was there. That's why. I'm getting tired. I still have pages of this stuff, man. February 1999. The decision to again amend the covert action authorization, canceling the kill authorization of December and reinstating the capture language. In February 1999, another draft memorandum of notification went to President Clinton. It asked him to allow the CIA to give exactly the same guidance to the Northern Alliance as it had just been given to the tribals. They could kill bin Laden if successfully captured, if a successful capture operation was not feasible. On this occasion, however, Clinton crossed out key language he had approved in December and inserted more ambiguous language. This is the move of a fucking lawyer. This isn't a leader. This is a lawyer. No, this is trying to give himself an out. This is, it depends on what the word is. No one we interviewed could shed light on why the president did this. They should have interviewed me. I just explained it. President Clinton told the commissioner that he had no recollection of why he wrote the language. Bill, pick up the phone. Call me. I'll explain it to you. Later in 99, when legal authority is needed for enlisting still other collaborators and for covering a wide set of contingencies, the lawyers returned to the language used in August 98, which authorized force only in the context of a capture operation. Given the closely held character of the document approved in 98 and the subsequent return of the earlier language, it is possible to understand how the former White House officials and the CIA officials might disagree as to whether the CIA was ever authorized by the president to kill bin Laden. It was manufactured confusion. This is a bone of contention with the intelligence community and with all these White House guys like Richard Clarke. And you find them in interviews going, yeah, we totally gave the CIA authorization to kill him. That's like the fucking first thing we did. And then it cuts to Michael Scheuer, who is in charge of the CIA bin Laden operation. He was like, no, they never did give us the authority to kill him. In May of 1999, the decision not to do the missile strike on Kandahar. This is like Nietzsche's eternal reoccurrence. Like, we're just reading the same stories over and over and over again, just in different years. It was in Kandahar that perhaps the last and most likely the best opportunity arose for targeting bin Laden with cruise missiles before 9/11. In May 1999, CIA assets in Afghanistan reported on bin Laden's location in and around Kandahar over the course of 5 days and nights. The reporting was very detailed and came from several sources. If this intelligence was not actionable, working level officials said that at the time and today, it was hard for them not to imagine how any intelligence on bin Laden in Afghanistan would meet the standard. Communications were good. The cruise missiles were ready. This was our strike zone, the senior military officer said. It was a fat pitch home run. He expected the missiles to fly, and when the decision came back that they would stand down, not shoot, this officer said, we all just slumped. He told us he knew of no one at the Pentagon or the CIA who would have thought this was a bad gamble. Bin Laden should have been a dead man that night. Working level CIA officials agreed. While there was conflicting intelligence reports about bin Laden's whereabouts, the experts discounted it. At the time, the CIA working level officials were told by their managers that the strikes were not ordered because the military doubted the intelligence. They worried about collateral damage. We might damage the mosque next door. Replying to a frustrated colleague in the field, the bin Laden unit chief, this is, I think, Michael Scheuer, having a chance to get bin Laden 3 times in 36 hours and foregoing the chance each time has made me a bit angry. The DCI finds himself alone at the table, and the other principals basically saying, we'll go along with your decision, Mr. Director, then implicitly saying that the agency will hang alone if the attack does not get bin Laden. They have stories about them just calling the White House and being like, can we do it? Can we do it? And them in the White House not picking up their phone. I mean, to me, that's crazy. The military officer quoted earlier recalled that the Pentagon had been willing to act. He told us that Clarke informed him and the others that Tenet assessed the chance of the intelligence being accurate as 50-50. Everybody else is on board. Everybody else is saying, like, this is it. This is it. We're going to get him. Except for Richard Clarke, who's like, I don't know. This officer believed that Tenet's assessment was the key to the decision. Tenet told us he does not remember any details about this episode. Imagine being involved in a decision like this and not remembering it. Except that the intelligence came from one single source, uncorroborated, and that it was at a risk of collateral damage. Berger remembered only that in all such cases, the call had been Tenet's. It's like a game of hot potato. Berger felt sure that Tenet was eager to get bin Laden in his view. Tenet did this job responsibly. George would call and say, we just don't have it, Berger said. Oh my God, Berger. The decision not to strike in May of 99 may now seem hard to understand. Yeah. In fairness, we note 2 points. First, in December 98, the principal's wariness about ordering a strike that appears to have been vindicated. Bin Laden left his room unexpectedly. I don't think that's been vindicated. I want to know who Richard Clarke was on the phone with that day. If a strike had been ordered, he would not have been hit. Second, he would not have been hit. There's a track record of Richard Clarke knowing where he was and then him disappearing. Am I the only person that sees this? The CIA in particular was in the midst of intense scrutiny and criticism by May 1999 because faulty intelligence had just led the United States to mistakenly bomb the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the NATO war against Serbia. This episode may have made officials more cautious than might otherwise have been the case. So you might think that I'm done. Oh no, brothers. I am not done. I have much more. Depressingly much more. December 2000. The decision not to strike against bin Laden after the Al-Qaeda attack on the U.S. Cole. Back in Afghanistan, bin Laden anticipated U.S. military retaliation. He ordered the evacuation of all Al-Qaeda's Kandahar airport compound and fled first to the desert near Kabul, then to Noist, and then to Jalalabad, and eventually back to Kandahar. In Kandahar, he rotated between 5 and 6 residences, spending one night at each residence. In addition, he sent his senior advisor, Mohammed Atef, to a different part of Kandahar, and his deputy, Ayman al-Zawahiri, to Kabul, so that all 3 could not be killed in one attack. In mid-November, as the evidence of Al-Qaeda involvement mounted, Berger asked General Shelton to reevaluate military plans to act quickly against bin Laden. General Hugh Shelton asked General Tommy Franks, the new commander of CENTCOM, to look again at the options. Shelton wanted to demonstrate that the military was imaginative and knowledgeable enough to move on an array of options to show the complexity of the operation. He briefed Berger on the infinite resolve strike option developed since 1998, which the Joint Staff and CENTCOM had refined during the summer into a list of 13 possibilities or combinations. CENTCOM added a new phased campaign concept for wider-ranging strikes, including attacks against the Taliban. For the first time, these strikes envisioned an air campaign against Afghanistan of indefinite duration. November 25th, Berger... Here we go. All the bad actors in one sentence. On November 25th, Berger and Clarke wrote President Clinton that although the FBI and CIA investigations had not reached a formal conclusion, they believed the investigations would soon conclude that the attack had been carried out by a large cell whose senior members belonged to Al-Qaeda. Most of these involved had trained in bin Laden operation camps in Afghanistan. Berger continued, so far bin Laden had not been tied personally to the attacks and nobody had heard him directly order it, but 2 intelligence reports suggested that he was involved. Nearly a month later, on December 21, the CIA made another presentation to a small group of principals on the investigative team's findings. CIA briefing slides said that their preliminary judgment was that bin Laden's Al-Qaeda group supported the attack on the Cole, based on strong circumstantial evidence tying key perpetrators to the attack to Al-Qaeda. CIA listed that key suspects, including Nashiri. In addition, the CIA detailed the timeline of the operation from mid-99 preparations to the failed attack on the USS The Sullivans on January 3rd, 2000, through a meeting held by the operatives the day before the attack. This, President Clinton and Berger told us, was not the conclusion they needed in order to go to war. They're not going to war. To deliver an ultimatum to the Taliban threatening war. The election and change of power was not the issue, President Clinton added. There was enough time if the agencies had given him a definitive answer, he said, he would have sought a UN Security Council ultimatum, because we all know that works out just perfect. And given the Taliban 1, 2, or 3 days before taking further action against both Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but we did not think it would be responsible for a president to launch an invasion of another country based on preliminary judgment. No attack was launched, and one angry official rhetorically asked of the defense officials, does Al-Qaeda have to attack the Pentagon to get their attention? So this defense official, I have a feeling it's Michael Scheuer. So that's all enough of this 9/11 report. I think it really sheds some light on it, especially if you're kind of paying attention to like what's in between the lines here. It's one thing to have this stuff in a report that no one reads. Obviously, no one reads it. I mean, I'm not a genius, but I was able to find this stuff in there. But I have this whole thing here about this. It's like a 5-hour-long TV miniseries in 2006. It was called The Path to 9/11, and it was based on this 9/11 Commission's report. This thing is so damning to Bill Clinton that Harry Reid, he's not in the picture anymore. Thank you to the people of Nevada. And Chuck Schumer and these clowns threatened Disney/ABC's broadcasting license if they played it. I found the letter that they sent to Bob Iger. Here's a few gems. I'm not going to get into, I have this whole spiel about it, but I'm not going to get into the whole thing. So here's this letter. This is the United States government threatening Disney. We write with serious concerns about the planned upcoming broadcast to the Path to 9/11 miniseries on September 10th and 11th. Countless reports from excerpts on 9/11 who have viewed the program indicate numerous and serious inaccuracies that will undoubtedly serve to misinform the American people about the tragic events surrounding the terrible attacks of that day. Furthermore, the manner in which the program has been developed, funded, and advertised suggests a partisan bent. Imagine Disney being partisan towards the right. I mean, this is just laughable. Partisan bent, unbecoming of a major company like Disney and a well-respected news organization like ABC. We therefore urge you to cancel this broadcast, to cease Disney's plans to use it as a teaching tool in schools across America through Scholastic. Presenting such deeply flawed and factually inaccurate misinformation to the American public and to children would be a gross miscarriage of your corporate and civic responsibilities to the law, to your shareholders, and to the nation. This docudrama was based on the 9/11 report. I mean, let it sink in. The Communications Act of this is part of the letter. They're basically threatening to pull Disney's broadcast license. The Communications Act of 1993 provides your network with a free broadcast license predicated on the fundamental understanding of your principal obligation to act as a trustee to public airwaves in serving the public interest. Nowhere in this public interest obligation more apparent than in the duty of the broadcasters to serve the civic needs of a democracy by promoting an open and accurate discussion of political ideas and events. Now let that fucking sink in for a second. They go on to say, to quote Steve McPherson, president of ABC Entertainment, when you take on the responsibility of telling the story behind such an important event, it is absolutely critical that you get it right. Unfortunately, this is the government. Unfortunately, it appears Disney and ABC got it totally wrong. Despite claims by your network that the representatives that the path to 9/11 is based on the report of the 9/11 Commission, the 9/11 Commission themselves, Jamie Gorelick, as well as other experts on the issues, disagree. And here's what two superstars from our story have to say about the path to 9/11, despite the snippets of the actual report that I just read to you. Can you guess which ones I'm going to read? I bet you can. I bet you can fucking guess it, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Richard Clarke, the former counterterrorism czar and national security advisor to ABC, has described the program as deeply flawed and said the program's depictions of a Clinton official hanging up on an intelligence agent, it's 180 degrees from what happened. The 9/11 miniseries is criticized as inaccurate and biased. New York Times. Let that sink in. September 6, 2006. All right, this is the last bit, and then I'll let you go for the evening. This is the second superstar who weighed in on this on this Disney movie as a 9/11 Commission member and so much more. Jamie Gorelick said, "It is critically important to the safety of our nation that our citizens, in particular our school children, understand what actually happened and why, so that we can proceed from a common understanding of what went wrong and act with unity to make our country safer." So I'll leave you with that. And I'll just say what I always say at times like this. I'm John Towers, and this wraps up our exhaustive, to me at least, I'm exhausted. I recorded these 3 episodes back to back to back, so I need a couple of days to dry out, if you know what I mean. This has been our exhaustive look at 9/11, and this has been the Abracast. And I want to just thank all the supporters. I just want to thank you for your support. Thanks a lot, everybody. And just thank you, listeners, for just listening. And here's Hilla to tell you everything else.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review. On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode.
Towards Mount Rainier, he saw 9 gleaming discs outlined against the snow, each one about the size of a C-54. Is it a function of false reporting? Is it a function of media incompetence or straight up misinformation? From my point of view, every, quote, flying saucer, unquote, story from this point on is at least a suspect for some sort of corruption. It has been over 2 years since the puzzling death of Captain Mantell. Mantell died mysteriously in the skies south of Fort Knox, but before his radio went silent, he sent a strange message to Goodman Air Force Base.
Support the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.